And good morning. Welcome to session number 4 of Courageous Path to Freedom VBS. Today's Bible stories concern Joseph and his father Jacob, as well as Moses. We have 2 separate stories, Joseph and Jacob, and one on Moses. The story for Joseph and Jacob takes place in Genesis chapters 47 and 48 and 49. The whole family has been brought down into Egypt now. Jacob sees Joseph and realizes, my son is alive. And he's going to stay with Joseph down in Egypt for the rest of his life. And while they're all alive, and Pharaoh is alive, the Pharaoh who was around when Joseph was his trusted number 2 employee, Pharaoh will treat the Hebrew people well. Jacob is now very, very aged. His body's starting to wear out, and he realizes he's not going to live much longer. He knows he's a very old man. Jacob's going to call Joseph to him in chapter 47 of Genesis, and he's going to tell him, I want to adopt your 2 sons as my sons. Any other children you have can be yours, but these are going to be mine. And he wants to give the children a blessing. One of the things that we learn later on in biblical history is that God commands the parents to be the ones to teach their children about God and to bless the children. An important part of Jewish family life, even down to this day, is the family having dinner together, particularly on Friday night, the beginning of the Sabbath. The parents will say a prayer over their children. They will say a blessing over their children. And very often, the dads and moms will lay their hands on the children's heads to ask God to take care of them, to help them do well in school, to help them make right choices, to grow up to be good people who serve God. The more a child hears a parent praying for them and asking God to bless them, the more of an impact it has on that child's life. Here in Exodus chapter 47, Jacob wants to do that now for Joseph's sons, and Joseph brings his 2 sons to give them to his father and present him so that his father can bless him. And because Joseph knows that Manasseh is his oldest son, he has placed Manasseh on his left, because as he's approaching his father, it'll be on his father's right-hand side. And he's got the younger boy, Ephraim, on his right, his father's left. When it comes time for the blessing, Jacob is going to cross his arms and lay his right hand on Ephraim, the younger boy's head, and his left hand on Manasseh, the older boy's head. Joseph will see it, and he'll try to correct his father. No, Father. Put your right hand on the oldest son. He's the one who's firstborn. And Jacob goes, no, my son, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to bless both your sons, but the younger son, Ephraim, is going to receive the bigger blessing because of the plan God has for him. Jacob will bless both those boys with a blessing that's appropriate to them, in line with what God has in mind for their future. A little bit later on, it's chapter 49. Genesis chapter 49, for the grown-ups and teenagers who are watching this, Genesis chapter 49 is one of the key passages in all the Bible. Jacob is near death. He has called the family in, all of his sons, to each receive a blessing appropriate to them that's going to tell what's going to happen with that particular son and his family and children and grandchildren down through the ages. A lot of what Jacob predicts has already come true throughout the rest of the Bible. Some of it is waiting to be fulfilled in the end times, but the vast majority of it has already come true. One of the things that Jacob is going to do in chapter 49 is he's going to single out the tribe of Judah. Judah was the one who tried to persuade Joseph, no, don't take Benjamin as a slave. Let him go. Let me substitute for him. That's how Joseph knew his brothers' hearts had really changed. Judah was willing to give himself up to take care of Benjamin. The tribe of Judah is going to be given a blessing that includes the fact that the Messiah, the king, is going to come from the family line of Judah. So in Genesis 49, Jacob is blessing each of his sons with a blessing that's appropriate to him. Some of you out at the chapel may recall the several times that we've done the study on Jacob's dozen, either as a retreat or as a Sunday school lesson. That whole study was based on what was prophesied in Genesis 49. Those of you who have participated in our Bible school know that we've had at various times tribal bandanas and then some tribal buffs. This is what the bandanas look like. This is one for the tribe of Simeon, and it's got written, let me fold it back, it's got written the name Simeon down here in English so that we can read it, and then right below it, it has the name of Simeon in Hebrew so that we could learn how to write the names in the Bible languages. And it has a symbol here. The Simeon for symbol, the symbol for Simeon, try saying that fast 3 times, is what looks like city gates. Because the tribe of Simeon was going to be given cities within the land of Israel, within the tribal territory of Judah. So the city gates was symbolic of the tribe of Simeon. Simeon's the brother who was ordered to stay in Egypt while the other brothers went back with food from their first trip. I'm going to show you just a couple of the other banners right quickly, not all 12 of them, though we do have all 12, and you'll see them in a later lesson. This is the one for the tribe of Naphtali. The color for Naphtali is kind of a brown color, and it's an antelope, a very fast deer. Naphtali was a swift runner, and here's Naphtali's name in English and Naphtali's name in Hebrew. And here's one from the tribe of Gad. Gad in English and in Hebrew. And Gad's tribal symbol looks kind of like a tent. The name Gad means troop, because Gad was the 6th son that Leah was able to give to Jacob through her servant girl Zilpah. And so after having provided Jacob with 6 sons, Leah names son number 6 Gad, which means troop, because she's got now almost a whole team of sons to give to her husband. Jacob's time to die is near. He calls all of his sons together. He has a blessing for each of them to let them know that God has a future for each one of you as an individual and for your families and for us as a nation. He lets them know there's going to be some hard times ahead. But the day will come when God will carry us back up out of Egypt and send us back to the land of Canaan that he promised Abraham and Isaac and me would belong to our family forever. And so his blessing included telling his sons what was going to happen in the future and asking them to wait on God and trust God for the outcome. But he also asked them to promise one thing, that when he died, he didn't want to be buried there in Egypt. He gave them very specific instructions. When I die, carry my body back to the land of Canaan, to the cave in the field of Machpelah that my grandfather Abraham purchased as a burial plot for our family. Abraham and Sarah are buried there. My father Isaac and mother Rebekah are buried there. I buried Leah there. That was Jacob's first wife. When she died, she was buried in the family tomb there at the cave of Machpelah in a town that we would today call Hebron. Carry me back and bury me there. And his sons promised, and they did so. When their father died, all the brothers went to Joseph and they told Joseph, before our father died, he told us to pass this message on to you, to not hold it against us because of the way we mistreated you earlier. We don't know whether Jacob actually told his sons that, or whether they were afraid that now that their father was dead, that Joseph might suddenly remember what they had done wrong to him and turned against them. Joseph was actually very grieved to hear what his brothers had to say. He reminded them, don't you know I have forgiven you for what you did to me? You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. There's a lesson for us. If we do something wrong and we confess our sins to God, and we confess to maybe mom, dad, this is what we did wrong, even if they have to punish us, they still love us. And they don't keep reminding us all the time about, remember the time that you disobeyed me and you did this wrong. Moms and dads forgive. Brothers and sisters should forgive each other. Friends should forgive each other for things that they do wrong to each other, because God forgives us, and so we don't need to keep bringing up the past. Joseph just reminded his brothers, God's in control of the future. All these things that happened, good or bad, I can see how God was working it out for good. So Joseph did take good care of his brothers even after their father died. Now we move to our second story for relying on God for the future. Yesterday we talked about how Moses had led the people. He had gone and talked to Pharaoh before each and every plague and pleaded with Pharaoh, do what God says. Let the people go and worship me. And Pharaoh kept refusing. Once that last plague, the death of the firstborn, where Passover started, Pharaoh now finally agreed to let them go. And so Moses began to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, headed toward the promised land. And I need to go to the map here for a minute, and I'm going to pick up the staff again while we're at it. I'm going to stand on this side, and I'm going to use this map. They're over here in Egypt. They need to go here to Canaan, to the promised land, but first they have to go and worship God on the mountain of God. Mount Sinai is here in what to us would be modern-day Saudi Arabia. It was called the land of Midian here. This little triangle, I don't know if you can see it on our map or not, but if you've got a Bible map, you can look up Mount Sinai. Some of them will place Mount Sinai down here, some will place it over here. It's over here. Church tradition in the 4th century was trying to find the spot, and they thought this might be the place, but no archaeology evidence suggests that it was here. There's a lot of archaeology evidence that suggests that Mount Sinai was over here. For one thing, if you look at any maps, Egypt controls the Sinai Peninsula. It was always considered to be a part of Egypt. And when we read in the scriptures, in Exodus 13 and 14, about the children of Israel leaving Egypt and going and through the Red Sea and going to worship God on the mountain, they had to get outside of Egypt, get away from Pharaoh. Pharaoh controlled this real estate. Plus, they had to cross water, and they can cross water here. If they're coming out of here and coming down here, they don't have to cross water. They had to cross water. Mount Sinai is over here. So let me pick up now the staff, because I'm going to need it. Pharaoh said, let the people go, take what spoils you will of Egypt. And so when the Israelites left Egypt, they're now going out with lots of presents from the Egyptians, lots of cattle and lots of sheep and gold and silver jewelry, that kind of thing. They're starting to leave Egypt. God leads them on a path, and it describes high canyon walls. We think they were following a wadi that led them to a place on the shores of the Gulf of Aqaba. It's part of the Red Sea, called Pi Hahiroth and Nuweiba Beach. They've got water in front of them. They had these steep canyon walls on both sides of them. Pharaoh has changed his mind. I'll pick up the Pharaoh hat and let it serve as our symbol for Pharaoh. Pharaoh has now sent his army with chariots and spears and swords, and he's going to chase after them. God provided a pillar of fire that prevented Pharaoh's army from being able to get to the Israelites. The pillar of fire is protecting the rear. The high, steep canyon walls, Pharaoh can't go around the fire and get to them, but there's this body of water, the Red Sea, in front of them. The people think they're trapped. Now what do? Maybe we should submit to the Egyptians and go back and be slaves. And Moses said, no. Stand still. Trust God. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Remember, our theme is relying on God for the future. In the present, the Israelites thought they were trapped. There's this big body of water that they can't possibly swim across with all their wives and kids and possessions. There's this Egyptian army behind them. Yes, the army's being held up by this pillar of fire, but sooner or later the fire is going to die out. And there are high canyon walls that they can't climb on both sides of them. What to do? Here's what you do. When you don't know what to do, rely on God. Moses took his staff and he stretched it out over the seas. I'm going to let my blue cloth here represent the seas. Maybe you have a blue beach towel or a blue sheet, something you could use as representing the Red Sea. He stretched it out over the sea, and right at that precise moment, God sent a strong east wind that pushed back the waters and also dried off the path through the seabed, and Moses and the children of Israel were able to go right through the middle of the seabed on dry land so that the wheels of their carts wouldn't get stuck. They got all the way to the other side, where now they're in the land of Midian. And at that moment, God allowed the pillar of fire that had been holding the Egyptians back to die down. And the Egyptians, having seen what the children of Israel did, decided they could do it too. But God wasn't with the Egyptians. The Egyptians had disobeyed God time after time. The Egyptian army got partway through the sea, and God allowed the wind to die down and the water collapsed on them. We did an Egypt VBS a few years ago out at the chapel, and it was one of the most popular things that we've ever done. This is an activity that you could do at home as a family and have a whole lot of fun. Put on your bathing suits. Maybe you've got a shower curtain. I brought in a shower curtain that we happen to have at our house, and it's a water-themed shower curtain. You can see I've got some dolphins floating there. It's a shower curtain. And out at the chapel, we put up a pop-up tent and a big, heavy, tight string, and we used our shower hooks, and we hung up shower curtains on either side of the pop-up tent. Well, maybe you don't have a pop-up tent. Got a carport with a couple of posts that you could tie some string around. Got two trees put together. If nothing else, have two people stand on either end and hold up the shower curtain. Something else you're going to need that I need to step away for just a second because I left it on the other table. You get yourself shower curtain or beach towels, whatever you got, hang it up, get some squirt guns. The super soaker type squirt guns work great, even the small ones. Water hose. And you designate one person in the family to be Pharaoh and Pharaoh's army. Everybody else either gets to be the Israelites crossing through on dry land, and as soon as all the Israelites get over, give them a water hose, a filled up water hose. And you have one person holding the water hose. That should be probably a teenager or grown up, somebody that knows not to spray water directly into kids' faces. When we did this out at the chapel, each one of our tribes of VBS students went through our pop-up tent, and as soon as they got to the other side, we gave them water hoses and let them stand on the sides, ready to attack. Then we had one of our chaplains playing the role of Pharaoh, and some teenage boys who were Pharaoh's army, and they came charging in with their fake spears like they were going to attack the Egyptians. And when the leader gave the signal, everybody got to use the water hoses to squirt Pharaoh and his army. They played along. They got down on the tarp we'd placed on the ground. They're rolling around. They had fun. They had so much fun with it that some of the teenage girls who were volunteering in other parts of the VBS wanted to be in the Egyptian army too. And I explained to them, look, in our army, men and women are both allowed to serve. But in Pharaoh's army, only boys were allowed to be in Pharaoh's army. So we can't do it during VBS. For one thing, we need you to be where you volunteered. But I promise you, I'll give this to the youth minister, and y'all can have a youth outing afterwards. They all did that. They all had a lot of fun using the squirt guns. There's nothing in the Bible that says you shall bore them into the kingdom. Each one of these stories are stories that I want you to tell. You can read them, the stories, but it's much more fun to act it out. It's much more fun to put people in the stories and say, you are there. The children of Israel saw something that they had never seen before. The ocean parted ways, and they were allowed to go through on dry land, and as soon as their enemy tried to do it, the waters collapsed in on top of their enemy. They're now safe from their enemy. They're now outside of Egypt. They're at Mount Sinai. They're free from slavery. They've been slaves for 400 years. It's one thing to be free from slavery. It's another thing to be free to choose to worship God and to decide that you're going to let God lead you. They need to spend some time at Mount Sinai learning how to act like God's people, how to treat other people the way you want them to treat you. Otherwise, they're likely to repeat the same kind of behaviors that the Egyptians used to do to them on each other and other people. So God's got to keep them at Mount Sinai for a while to teach them how they are to become God's people. That'll be our lesson for tomorrow, for our last day of VBS, when we learn how to become God's people by trusting Him. Today, we've learned how to rely on God for the future. Joseph, Jacob, and those 12 tribes trusted in God's promise on what was going to happen for the future. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren 400 years later saw God act on their behalf to spare them from Pharaoh and his army, and now they've got to learn to be God's people. We'll see you tomorrow for the final session of Courageous Path to Freedom.
Good morning, boys and girls and families. Mark Barker here again with some more science from Egypt. They knew how to tell time, and they did it in a couple of different ways. They developed a calendar, but they also knew how to tell time each day. One of the ways they did that is they like to build these things called obelisks. And they would build those for more than one reason, but they realized that the sun cast a shadow from that thing, and they could measure the movement of the sun based on the shadow of that. We have today's sundials. That was a later version of that. As a matter of fact, I have a sundial in my yard. And so they could tell time of the day by casting how that shadow was cast. Here's another picture of an obelisk. They had symbols and signs on it, and they did some things with them, but they could use those to help tell time. Another way they told time was by making a water clock. And here's a picture of an Egyptian water clock. And they, of course, they were ornate. They decorated them. But the way it worked was there was a hole in the top, hole in the bottom. And they would put markings on the inside of the bowl to tell how long it took for the water to drain out. Here's a better picture one. You can see where the water drains out at the bottom. And they have these circles cut in it. And so they would measure, using the obelisk and the time of the day, how how time would pass by using dripping water. And you could do that at home. I got my cup from when we went out to one of the restaurants here. I got water in it. I'm going to put it in a thing like that catches the water at the bottom. And you could use a different tool or different basin. But anyway, they just put a little hole in there so that the water will drain out. And what you could do with your clock is, because we have watches, you could cut your hole and put it in there and then check your watch how long it takes to, and then mark on the inside or even on the outside the water level and see how long it takes for the water to go down certain inches, certain centimeters, etc. And then you could tell time that way. We have hourglasses. We have sand in them. You turn them upside down. That tells a tower. Usually those are 10 minutes, 1 minute, an hour, so forth. But they were the first to come up with a water clock so they could tell what time it was in the middle of the day. Now, time now is for me to go, so see you again tomorrow.
I am Pharaoh Ramesses. I am the ruler of Egypt. My people consider me to be God manifest on the earth. I have been dealing now with the Hebrews for many, many years. Moses, who used to be part of our household of Egypt, left us, went to a foreign land when he accidentally injured an Egyptian. He's come back. He has come before me 10 times, and each time he brings me a message that I do not want to hear and do not want to agree to. He keeps coming and saying, God says, let my people go. But I do not know this God. We, the Egyptians, worship many gods. Every time I have said no, Moses has pronounced judgment on us, saying, thus says the Lord, let my people go, or a plague will come upon you. We have had the plague of blood. The waters of the Nile turned blood red, killing all the fish, causing all the frogs to leave the river. We had the plague of the frogs, bringing with them their disease. We had flies feeding on the carcasses of the animals that died because they could not get water because the Nile ran red with blood. We had the cattle disease, the wild beast. We came down with diseases. Painful, hard boils appeared on our skin. Each time Moses would come to me and say, God says, let my people go. Each time I said no, and the plagues got worse. Then hail came from the skies, but this hail was different. It was burning hail. Hail is normally very cold, but this was burning hail. Then the locust swarms came, and they ate what little food was left in all of Egypt. Then darkness appeared over all of Egypt, and it lasted for 3 days. But in Goshen, where Moses and his Hebrews were at, there was no darkness. They had light. But still, I believed in the gods of Egypt, and I continued to refuse to let Moses' people go. Now he comes to me and he tells me that one more plague is going to come upon Egypt, that if I do not let the people go, that God will cause an angel of death to strike down the firstborn of all Egypt. I do not want anything to happen to my son, my crown prince, but I do not really believe yet in this God of Moses. We will wait and we will see whose God really is the one true God. And welcome back to day 4 of Courageous Path to Freedom Virtual VBS. Today we're in the farmer's field to learn how they recognize the plants, figured out which plants would be good to make herbs and spices and which ones will be good to use for food. So I'll turn it over to our resident expert, our baker, Annie Dent.
Good morning, I am Annie Dent, and we are going to talk about herbs today. The first one is mint. Mint is really good to make your house smell good, and you can make mint tea with strawberries, or either you can have it with lemons. It can be used in a variety of ways. And the next one is parsley. Parsley is very good to cook with in soups and salads, and you can even use it to make your breath smell fresh. Just dip it in some water and salt and just kind of chew on it, and it is very delicious also. And our next one is, oh Lord, I can't think of the name of it. Rosemary. Rosemary is used for baking, chicken dressing, all sorts of meat, soups, salads, and it's just really good for you. It makes your food taste better. And our last one is basil. Basil is really good for you. You can make basil cakes, basil cookies. It can be used in soups and salads. It's just, you can use it in a variety of ways.
And welcome to session number 4 of Courageous Path to Freedom. We're looking at health and beauty. We've discussed the fact that they use makeup not only in Egypt but in Israel to beautify themselves. We've talked about some of the hygiene things that they had to do. Today I'm wearing some of the costume beads. They had jewelry. If you want to, at home, most moms have makeup kits and may have some costume type jewelry, and you could practice letting both the guys and the girls, because guys wore some kinds of jewelry, particularly wristbands and headbands, so you could practice with that. But today we're primarily going to talk about some of the health instructions that was given to the Israelites. For 40 years they were wandering in the wilderness and they did it in a specific order. They weren't just out there going around with no instructions. They built the wilderness tabernacle once they got to Mount Sinai, because when Moses is up on the mountain, he's getting not only the 10 Commandments, but he's also getting the instructions for the priesthood, and he's getting the instructions for how the people should build the wilderness tabernacle that's going to be their worship home. The furniture that they use in the wilderness tabernacle will also be put in the temple, and it'll stay there for use throughout their history, all the way up to the time that King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians come and knock the temple down. Most of the treasures will go to Babylon and then will be brought back and put in the second temple. One piece of furniture, the Ark of the Covenant, is not listed among the things that Nebuchadnezzar took away. No one to this day knows where it is. The best evidence from Scripture is that the Ark of the Covenant was probably hidden right there underneath the Temple Mount just before the Babylonians came in and sacked it. So most of the furniture that they used for worship, they had to carry with them once they made it everywhere they went, and they had a specific order. They would set up the tabernacle, and on the east side of the tabernacle, 3 of Leah's sons, Judah, and 2 of his immediate brothers, Simeon and Zebulun, would be on the east side. Reuben, another one of Leah's sons, Issachar, and Gad would be on the south side. Rachel's sons, Joseph, and Joseph is broken up into 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, because as we're going to learn, Jacob actually adopts Joseph's 2 sons as his own. So Rachel's boys will be on the western side, and then the tribes of Dan and Naphtali and Asher will be on the northern side of the tent. The Levites would be parked right there inside the tent as their place to dwell, because they were responsible for taking care of the tabernacle. Well, when you're moving around and you're camping, even when you're camping with the same people each time, you have to figure out some things to do to make sure that you stay healthy. So they would set up their cooking upstream, their washing of their clothes and themselves a little bit further downstream, and then anything to do with taking care of restroom type duties, the furthest south. Why? Because they wanted to stay healthy. So they do the cooking, then they do the washing, then they would do other cleansing. They learned in the wilderness how to camp around water sources. Not a whole lot of streams in the areas they were going to, but occasionally they would find some. Mostly they would gather around an oasis, which would be a spring of water, and they could have fresh water there. Sometimes they would come to an oasis and they would discover that the water was bitter. There were a couple of occasions when Moses asked God how to turn the water from bitter to sweet, and God would tell him what to do to put in the water to make it safe for the people to drink. Not terribly unlike what happens in our society, where if you are on water for a city or a county, you're not out in the country on a well, the city or the county, whatever the government is, may have some fluoride or chlorine or other things that they are putting into the water system that would help get rid of harmful elements in the water, and might even help with things like making it easier for you to brush your teeth because there's extra fluoride in the water. So they were using knowledge they got from God on how to stay healthy. See you tomorrow for a little bit more about health and beauty. And good morning. Welcome to day 4 of Courageous Path to Freedom VBS. Nancy Jankowski, VBS Director. Doretha Bennett. I'll let you say your own name this time.
Doretha Bennett.
She's our crafts director, and she's going to demonstrate today not baby Moses. We had baby Moses yesterday. Now Moses is a grown man, and he's going to encounter God in the form of the burning bush. I really like this craft.
Okay, the things you're going to need for this craft, it's a plastic cup. You can use a mason jar, the small ones, something that you can see through.
Baby food jar?
Baby food jar will be fine. And then you will need tissue paper, preferably orange, the yellow, and the red. And you will need scissors. You will need a glue stick again. And you will need one of these little lights. They're little fake burning lights, which is safe. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get your glue stick, and you're going to put a little bit on there to get started, and then a little bit on the rim. And the first color you can choose, it doesn't matter. It's the orange. Then you go with the yellow and the red. And it doesn't matter about the how you cut your strips. The end could be like a little piece that's cut through the middle, the end of it. Let me give you an example of that. It's a piece of the red. And you can cut a triangle. It doesn't matter if it's straight or crooked, it doesn't matter. And what we want to do is continue to put the glue stick on here, on the rim. Put the yellow. Put a little bit more. Oh, the red. Like that. Very easy, very simple, and you can go in any order you want to. You don't have to go into the orange and the yellow and the red, but that's what I chose. And you can also double up if you want to put more of the yellow. Okay. And then you can go so far, and then once you're finished with all of that gluing and sticking it on there, then you open up, you turn your little flicker on, your little candle, fake, you place it in, and there's your burning bush.
And good morning. Welcome to Courageous VBS. We're looking at ancient life. Today we're looking at music and musical instruments. Everybody can at least appreciate music. Some people have very good musical voices and can sing, or they have talent to play an instrument. But even if you don't have musical training, don't know how to play an instrument, don't know how to sing very well, you can still enjoy music. Music can inspire people. Music can get people excited. That's why sports teams, for example, will have their band play a song that stirs up the crowd when their team scores at a football game. Anybody can enjoy music. Music helps soothe our soul too, though. Sometimes when we're feeling sad, or we're anxious, or we don't know what to do, listening to music can help us heal our hearts if we're sad over the loss of a loved one, or if we're worried or stressed out. Music can be very calming, and it can add a lot to our lives. Well, the ancient Hebrews had musical instruments available to them too, and we know the Egyptians did because we've seen some of that in their hieroglyphs. This morning I'm going to demonstrate several musical instruments very briefly for you. Some of these we've used in live VBSs out at the chapel in recent years, and some of them are very popular. The first two I'm going to show you are the same thing, though they look a whole lot different. This is a small ram's horn. This is probably the kind that Gideon and Joshua and his soldiers would have had with them when they went into battle, because they could tuck it into their belts. It has an opening for them to use to blow, to assemble the crowds together. If you've ever seen movies like the Ten Commandments, you'll have them getting ready to leave Egypt and go out to the Promised Land, and you'll see the character playing Joshua holding and blowing one of these. This is also a ram's horn. This one is about 3 feet long, curly-cued. It kind of looks a little bit like a snake, but it's a ram's horn. It's the horns that'll grow out of the side of a male sheep or goat's head. And cutting it off to make this instrument doesn't hurt the goat. It's kind of like getting your hair cut or getting your fingernails trimmed. If it's done properly, you don't feel any pain when your hair's cut, and if you cut your nails properly and don't get too close to the quick, it won't hurt to do your nails. This is the open end. I mentioned in one of our Bible storyteller times that the way you blow this instrument is you put your mouth right up to it, but you don't put your mouth around it. And when you barely open your mouth and push through the sound, it makes a mighty, mighty sound. They certainly had these. This goes all the way back to the time of Abraham. When Abraham was carrying his son Isaac up onto Mount Moriah, you and I would know that as the Temple Mount. He had the wood, he had the fire, but he had the knife, but he didn't have a sacrifice. And Isaac even asked him, "Father, we have the wood, we have the knife, we have the fire. Where's the young beast for the sacrifice?" And Abraham's response was really very prophetic. God himself will provide a young beast. Well, Abraham is just about ready to do the sacrifice when God allowed a ram, that's a male sheep, to get caught by its horns in the thick brush that was on the mountain. A ram getting caught in the brush is kind of like a fish forgetting how to swim. It just doesn't normally happen. They know they have these horns on the side of their head, and they know how to avoid getting caught. That ram was appointed by God to go and be the sacrifice that Abraham and Isaac needed as an offering to the Lord. Animals were used in sacrifice in the temple throughout the temple's history. So ever since Abraham, they had been using the ram's horn as a musical instrument to remind them of the things that God had done for them. When they come out of the wilderness, or when they come out of Egypt and they're headed into the wilderness, we have accounts of Moses singing a song in Exodus chapter 14 as they have witnessed the miracle of God parting the Red Sea. While they're wandering in the wilderness, they set up worship at the tabernacle because God gave Moses instructions on how to build the tabernacle furniture. A little bit later on in this week, we're going to look at some of the actual models of the types of furniture they did for the tabernacle, and we're even going to look at the priest robe that God instructed Moses to have made for Aaron to wear when he was holding the office of priest. Depending upon which kind of church service you go to, whether it's at a military chapel or a church out in your community, the minister leading your worship service may dress in casual clothes, may wear a suit and tie, may wear a collar, may wear robes. Well, all that goes back to the tradition of Aaron and his sons, the priests, had special robes to wear. So we're going to look at those a little bit later on this week. But they used music in worship, and in that same passage where it's talking about singing the song of Moses, horse and rider thrown into the sea for the Egyptians while God spared his people, it mentions Moses' sister Miriam leading the women in doing some praise music. Some of the things that they used were tambourines. I've got several examples of tambourines here, instruments that can be shaken. Here's another one. This one I brought along I particularly like because it's shaped like the six-pointed Star of David that later on in their history became the national symbol for the Israel people. They probably didn't have this shape in Egypt time, but you can tell it's another example of a tambourine, a musical instrument. They also had instruments that would shake or rattle. They had flutes. This particular flute, if you use it, it makes different sounds. You might have a flute around your house, or you might be able to find a simple plastic flute at any toy or game or Dollar Tree type store if you wanted to do musical instruments at your own house. They had some rudimentary clappers. They sometimes would shake and rub sticks together, or they would clap them back and forth like this. And they definitely had drums. But I'm also going to mention here two particular types of musical instruments that they used in worship. This one, I have to stand up for a second. They had both silver and gold trumpets that were used in the tabernacle and the temple for worship. We've used these out at the chapel. Those of you who have done VBS with us out at Fort Rucker, your kids probably are familiar with these. And what we would do after each and every child had a turn at it, we would take some of the Clorox or Lysol type wipes and wipe off the mouthpiece for sanitation purpose. Well, these days everybody has sanitary wipes, so even if you're passing it around within your own family, or if you get a group of neighbors and friends together and you want them to try some of the instruments, either have one for every child or use those Clorox wipes. They would use the silver trumpets and the gold trumpets specifically for worship. They could use the ram's horn in worship. They also could use the ram's horn when it was time for war. And the last instrument I'm going to show you today, just to give you an idea of what music was like, this is called a kinnor. We would think of it as more like a harp because you would pluck it or strum it, but this is really the very ancient version of the guitar. If you've ever been on a trip to Israel and you're in Jerusalem and you go to the section that they have just excavated where they have found the city of David and they're uncovering all kinds of archaeology there, the entrance to the city of David has a golden kinnor. It's a symbol of the nation of Israel. David, the second king of Israel, way later on in history than what we're talking about, started life as a shepherd. And he would be out there tending to the sheep, and he would play his instrument during the daytime, and he would make up a lot of songs, many of which we have recorded for us in the Bible, in the book of Psalms. But the instrument predates David. They had musical instruments like this, rudimentary guitars, going all the way back to the very early shepherd days. Well, Moses tended his father-in-law's sheep for 40 years out in the wilderness before he was called by God to be the leader of the people and go and set the people free. And we know from what's described to us in Exodus that Miriam, Moses' sister, became a leader of the women who led the singing at the tent of the tabernacle. So she was like the choir mistress, and they made a lot of music as a way of worshiping God. And music is very important in our worship too. So we'll talk tomorrow about some more things that were available in ancient life. See you tomorrow.